everyone. Welcome to the webinar, Breaking Barriers, Transforming Communication in Compliance and Risk Management. If you wouldn't mind just taking a few moments to introduce yourself in the chat. Where you're joining us from, what your role is, that'll help us tailor the conversation accordingly. And I'm Paula Fontana. I lead marketing here at Illuminar. I've been in and out of the risk and compliance industry really all my career, that in tandem with EdTech. So really excited about bringing what I think is a really fun topic to discuss, the topic of engagement and how can we really bring somewhat dense and complex information to the surface in a way that people can apply it. So I am joined here by the esteemed Alan Blumen. And Alan, I'm just gonna say this was just too good not to share. Yesterday I was prepping for this webinar and I did not realize that you were known as the Snoop Dogg of privacy and compliance.
Yeah, little known fact there, but apparently LinkedIn has deemed it so. I shared with you earlier, I am only 2 degrees separated from Snoop Dogg at any time through an odd story. So if anyone wants to know, just reach out to me. I'll tell you how that happened.
That's amazing. So what do you do in your work, Alan? I mean, you and I met this last year. I was actually, what brought us together is really some of the content that you put out on social, and maybe talk a little bit about that and what you're working on.
Yeah, of course. So as you just saw, I'm director at In Consulting, which is a privacy and AI governance consulting firm. And I've worked in compliance and privacy really my whole career. Started on the healthcare side and more recently really gone full all industry with it. A big part of that job is messaging and communications, whether you are trying to influence stakeholders, whether you're trying to teach people something. And so, yeah, we had a lot to talk about when it came to finding new ways to get people to pay attention to you, especially when you're talking about something people might not think is the coolest to begin with.
How can compliance not be cool?
Well, people are slow to realize it, so we got to help them along.
That's right. That's right. It's important, right? So our agenda for today, we're going to talk a bit about the fundamentals of creating compelling content. We're going to talk about integrating media, which I think is something that more and more teams are doing in terms of how do you bring the subject matter to life in a different way that's more relatable. So excited to dive into some examples there. No shortage of content that we can kind of explore together. Best practices for professional settings. And one of the things that Alan and I talk about a lot is, it's sort of it's a difficult thing to explore in terms of, how do you bring some of that edginess into your communications and training without, while still, being informative and not offending anyone. So, which is really important. And meeting people where they are ultimately. We're going to talk about some real world applications and case studies, including how to bring gamification into your process. And hopefully we'll have enough time for Q&A. I love this photo. This is actually a photo from one of my runs. And I think it speaks to kind of the changing environment, today's changing times, where the rules of the road are rapidly shifting. And so how do we as professionals, as leaders, really lead our teams through all of that ambiguity and uncertainty and the new rule setting, right? As that takes shape. So one of the things that we like to do as a part of these webinars, like I said, just keep it super engaging. So we're going to open this up with a poll. So if you wouldn't mind, either take out your phone or visit menti.com and enter the code 719656. And we'll get started with just a simple question to help us really shape this in a way that is exciting to you. What do you hope to get out of this session? Memes.
Me,
That's really boy. That's
really,
like,
really do this, people. You will remember the old choose your own adventure books that we would have when we were little. This is like a choose your own adventure webinar. Like you will direct how some of this conversation goes by telling us what you're into right now. So really do this.
yeah. While we wait for that to come through, I'll give you a few minutes to think about that. Ultimately, we all know that the business owns the risk, and I pulled some of the recent headlines, and I think this is, tells a really interesting story, not only about some of the threats that have faced us for a long time, but also how those threats continue to evolve. And so how do we really deputize the business to take the reins and lead from the front, right? And with the tools and the insights that they need to be successful. At the same time, our attention spans are shorter than ever. So whether you're working with people on the front line or in the boardroom or even your third parties, we don't have a lot of time to engage our constituents. I have heard that the whole this might be more of a myth that our attention span may be less than a goldfish, but I think the point is, and we all feel it, that that there's a lot going on, right? And it's difficult to capture people's attention and really get them focused on the job at hand. This is an interesting stat from Gartner about how employees are reporting that compliance training does not help them perform their job better. And so I think there's two things, like one, like how do you capture that attention, but also how do you help them apply that in a way that's meaningful to them? Are you seeing that in your role, Alan?
Yeah, absolutely. And I won't deny that my attention is way less than a goldfish. I don't think I even have 8 seconds worth. And I think that's real. It's not because people are dumber now, or I think people are more inundated with stuff. Like you said, there's a lot going on. And so we are in this constant filtering phase, right? Where things are in front of me and I'm filtering what's important, what's urgent, what's vital, meaning what's both urgent and important. And I am just knocking stuff out. And I probably am wrong sometimes in doing that, but there's too much. And so, yeah, you have got to get people fast. But I think everyone is doing that. Everyone is trying to get to what do I most need to pay attention to right now? And how can you grab them and hold on to them, knowing that they are spending less time on you than a goldfish would spend on you.
Yeah, I think that's really important point, that the topic of prioritization, because there's a lot of things coming at us. And I was talking to somebody at a conference recently from Canada, and she was saying how difficult it was to get constituents to pay attention to even meaningful risk. So in that case, she was dealing with wildfire risk, and but to a large extent, people are just inundated by threat after threat after threat, and they really don't have the capacity to absorb anything outside of the imminent emergency, right? And so how do and I think we even see this in our downtime, to your point. But what's interesting, because when I dug into some of the research behind the 8-second figure, just because I wanted to be accurate. So what's interesting is that, so some of the research says that is true. But it's interesting that now they're saying, like if you look at some of the more recent Netflix productions that are successful, they've actually been longer. So I think that sort of draws a finer point on something else that I think we're going to talk about today. Like how do you meet people where they are? How do you design content that connects the message that you're trying to articulate with the goals and the objectives of your audience, and what's important to them? And speaking of goals, so just want to revisit this poll here now that people have had some time to reflect. So it looks like we've got some folks here, for some new strategies, bringing fun to work, memes, tools to make memes, love it. how to be like Alan and Snoop Dogg.
Yeah, I've got some experience with that. So yeah, we'll talk there. It's good. It's good stuff.
All right. Thanks for participating in our poll there. That's actually one tool that we use quite often here at Illuminar. It's a tool called Mentimeter. They have a free plan, and they also have paid plans, of course. But it's a great way to bring presentations to life in a very interactive way. So we're going to talk about some other tools of the trade and things that we use from a marketing perspective and comms perspective. But check it out. It's mentimeter.com. So creating compelling content ultimately starts with the core, kind of the why. Simon Sinek talks about this quite a bit, kind of what is your why? I think like really understanding that North Star, and how that connects to your audience is really a grounding point. And really thinking about how that connects to not only how you do it and what you do ultimately, but what is the job that you're helping to your audience to solve. And I think that's one thing that's always struck me about some of the content that you put out, Alan, especially in a domain space that is really pretty conservative, is that it's not silly just for silly's sake. You always have an underlying point.
Sure. And I think, with that, what's the point question? You can have more than one. And I think the best content has more than one point. It has more than one goal with what it's trying to do. For example, for content that is in the compliance or risk space, just fulfilling a requirement is like the lowest form of that content. I understand that there may be requirements that say, hey, you're the compliance or risk professional. You've got to put this info in front of your team's faces once a year. And so you're like, okay, I did it. I put it in front of their faces, and you're satisfying that requirement, which has to happen. But that's pretty basic content, right? Content that goes further actually teaches people something as well as satisfying that requirement. And so that's a secondary goal. Okay, I have to do this, but I actually want them to learn something. And so I'm going to treat that content differently. And then I think a third, maybe it's like the highest level goal is, will this content reflect well on me, the presenter? Will it, endear people to me? Will it make me seem accessible to them? Will it make me look like a person they want to interact with again in the future? That's another third goal for some of your content. So not all those goals are not always appropriate for every situation, right? But some of them should be. And when you really plan that out, that's going to change, I think, some of your how and some of your what here. It's not just to get it in front of people, but it's to do some of these higher goals as well, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you're speaking to there is, how do you build that relationship with people? And that's difficult to do at scale. But I think, and this is something that we talk about quite often at Illuminar, is the value of sparking these light bulb moments or aha moments, getting people to think maybe differently than they had in the past, providing value first before you're asking for something. I think is really very important in terms of building that connection and really ultimately understanding your constituent. In marketing and in product management, we use personas often in terms of understanding our audiences, and especially when you're in a risk or compliance role or resilience or security, like you've got a lot of different stakeholders, right? And all of those people have very distinct roles, different objectives. They may have even the aspects that make them human, right, are really very different. And so understanding kind of the topology of your audience can be really important. Of course, like sometimes we can be critical of personas in that it does try to boil down the collective into something more simplistic. And obviously, when you generalize, you kind of lose something in the process. But just in terms of understanding the variability in your audience, and I guess, Alan, for you, like I think one thing that struck me is that like you've really created a niche within the industry um that is provocative, but it's not in a way that is offensive. So how have you leveraged your understanding of people to really create that?
Sure. I mean, I think, early on in my career, I had to realize, and I think everyone on the call, you have realized this, or maybe you will realize it for the first time. Like you have a persona, you have a brand personally that you're exuding or that people have assigned to you, maybe unfairly, maybe because of the role that you do. And so they are just taking their past experience with other people in similar roles and similar functions, and they have just tagged it on you. And that's not fair, but that's real, right? People have stereotypes and misconceptions based on prior experience or just what they've even heard. Maybe they haven't even experienced it. And so you are in charge a bit of how you're going to be perceived. And you're digging out of a hole sometimes if you're compliance or your risk, privacy, whatever. These roles that tend to come in and be like, hey, we can't really do this the way you've been doing it. People don't like that at first, right? And so you have one. And so early on, I realized, hey, people don't seem happy if I'm on the meeting, or people are not responding to my kind of straightforward email about this thing that I'm working on. And part of that, I think, was my persona. And like I said, it maybe wasn't me, but it was just everyone that had come before me in their life. I was now bearing that. And so I've said, how do I find a way to really start crafting this myself? How do I show people I'm not scary? I'm not here to like blow up your day. We can actually have fun about some of these things I'm talking about. I know they're really heavy and I know they sound scary and there's like fines and penalties, all this like terror, but we can have some positivity to it. But like you said, at the same time, knowing there's a line. I never want to be exclusionary to people. I don't want
Yeah.
to joke to go somewhere that some people won't get it. Some people may not be comfortable with it. Why would you want to be that way? And so, you test things out and kind of find that what's the best, most positive, funny version of my professional self? And that's going to be my persona. And I'm going to overwhelm people with it and overcome any of these past things that have already been potentially, assigned to me, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, breaking the stereotype, right? And I think like what you just articulated, in terms of understanding your role in the bigger picture, or like we've got here, like really mapping out the experience or mapping out the journey. Of course, you probably didn't sit down with a formal journey map in this case, but you really reflected on how not only the personas that you're interacting with, but how kind of what your role is in a bigger picture and how you can bring value to your constituents. This is a tool that we use in marketing quite a bit in terms of understanding kind of the stepwise progression through a process. But again, using tools like these, this is another example, stakeholder mapping. This is one of my favorites in terms of understanding the relationships between individuals and things, to better understand how you can be a catalyst for change, right? And that's often how we think of ourselves in the industry is like, how do we make change happen, but make change happen safely and really protect people in that process. This is some of the research that we had done about a year ago around the 4 archetypes of resilience. And I think this is true of just about any domain, is that like there is no one size fits all approach. A lot of the magic to what we do, of course, is understanding the individual. And what always struck me about some of the data that came out of this study is, and this analysis was done on the axes of engagement and systems, is that you really do have to tailor your approach in such a way that meets people where they are And so I think strategies like memes, gamification, stories, etc., those are all really well designed, or they can be well designed to kind of meet people in a way that feels comfortable to them. What are your thoughts on that, Alan?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great point. Think about the last three slides, three or four, I mean, that we've seen here. Some people might be seeing that and be like, you guys are making too much out of this. Like, it's not that deep. Like, we're just like crack a joke, right? As that we're talking about. And it is a balance, right? Of taking this beyond kind of what is helpful to you, but also being intentional about it to a degree and really saying like, I want to engage more people. So I've got to decide, who am I trying to reach and what are they into? How do they perceive me? How can I change that? What's the way to cut through? That's what we're going to talk about humor in a minute, because that cuts through so many potential barriers. And so don't be put off by this really science-y looking stuff. You go as deep into it as you need to go, but some actual planning, some creating that story. What journey do you want to be on? How are you going to emulate things that you see in other people? Like, it is real. It will not just happen if you're like, I've decided like every new meeting, I just tell a joke about what I did over the weekend, and that's going to change everything. It's not that simple, but it can not be so hard too if you just start putting a little of these building blocks in place, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect segue to our next poll. What types of non-traditional media do you use today in your content training? How did you get your start, Ellen?
You know, I really just perceived someone. There was someone on social media who worked in a totally different industry, one that I really don't know much about. And I would just see her content pretty often.
Mhm.
And I kind of noticed after a while, like, I feel like I know this person and I don't. We've never spoken. I don't know her at all. But I feel like I know a good bit about this industry now. I feel like I know its pain points. I feel like I know a way to overcome obstacles in it. And I feel like this is someone I would want to talk to if I ever tried to move into this arena. And I kind of was like, I think it's all from her content. Like I said, we've never interacted. It's just from the way that she was presenting herself, from the way that she was presenting her industry and some of her content. And so I connected with her. I said, hey, tell me whatever your rate is, because I need to pick your brain. Because whatever you're doing is working for me, someone that knows nothing about your world or you really, but I feel like I am engaged by the stuff you're putting out there. And so she was really gracious, took a little time with me, and we just kind of walked through a little bit of that storyboarding, I think. It's like, what is it you're wanting to accomplish? Her question to me. And like, what do you do naturally? How do you naturally speak? How do you naturally like to communicate with people? Out of the professional setting, when you're talking about your group chat, what does it look like? Because that's what comes natural to you. And how do we incorporate that more into your brand? And so she gave me some tips and then was like, go forth and just go do it poorly for a while, because you will eventually get better at it. And so, not sure if I'm still in the poorly stage or if I have gotten better at it, but I'm
You
still
broke
just
it out of
doing it because and it's just kind of become the norm as well. And I'm forever grateful kind of for that mentor that I had. And so
that.
always happy to talk about it. Like, this is nothing that I like woke up one day and I was like, I'm brilliant. I just solved everything. I just learned it seeing other people doing it.
Yeah, I love what you just said. I think there are like two things there. One, the concept of doing it poorly, right? And there is a fear factor involved, especially in an industry like ours, where it's a very conservative industry. And then on top of that, we could be working in an organization that is very conservative, right? Like financial services or insurance, or I mean, obviously those organizations are also changing, but like, how do you navigate that? Because you definitely want people to take you seriously. But at the same time, there is a sea of sameness out there. And it's really difficult to spark that aha when you kind of are lost in the sea of everything else that's out there. So how do you navigate that fine line?
Yeah, it's, to me, and this is something that I've perceived in myself, I think I see it in other people as well. You've got to do whatever it takes to build your own confidence initially. Like you've got to have confidence in your experience, in your knowledge, that you deserve to be where you're at and that you are helpful in the role that you are executing. When people don't feel confident, then people get really tight about what they want to say because they don't want to look silly. They don't want to say something dumb. They're just, you get nervous. When you are not confident and you are trying to communicate to someone, you just get very simple. You get very standard. You kind of just, I'm just going to do what everyone else does because I'm not really sure how to step out in this space. But when you think about people that you know and people that are kind of funny and light and easy to talk to, humor is evidence of expertise. It's not a guarantee of like mastery, but it is evidence of expertise. When we really know something, we're comfortable to talk about it and we can crack a joke about it and we can just talk about it in any setting because we know it. And so if you can get yourself, so do what you need to do. So study whatever books, find whatever mentors that you need to kind of get you like, I know my stuff and I can talk about this and I don't have to sound like a textbook. I can be light and free with it. That is going to unlock these things for you because you are not going to be afraid. Like you said, you're going to be able to read the room and say, okay, this is a time where I can go a little lighter with it. Okay, this one, hey, this is to the board. I'm going to keep it pretty standard because I'm reading the room and I can make those choices easily because I'm confident and that I know what I'm talking about. And so if you don't have that, this is going to be hard. It's going to be hard to stretch and start using new tools, new methods, new ways of talking. But you know yourself and you know maybe what that gap is to get you to that confident level if you don't feel like you're there. So do what you need to do to get there and trust in your own expertise and in your knowledge. And then this is really going to unlock for you, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting just looking at this poll here. It looks like we've got an audience that's fairly new to some of these strategies. So we're gonna dive into some examples here. I do think what you're talking about in terms of like even that the story that you gave around that you relate around meeting a mentor. I think when we're being creative, when we're leveraging like these more relatable means of conveying a message, we ultimately are more approachable, which can really help in solidifying those relationships that that ultimately build engagement, build capability, and in the context that we need, whether it's the during business as usual or whether it's in response to a critical event. So these were some of the examples that you gave around some of your highest performing content. You want to talk us through some of these and sort of how they evolved?
Yeah, for sure. These are, like you said, you'd ask me for like, what's some of the best performing like memes that you've had? And it's like, I grabbed some of the ones, they kind of show, I think a good example, again, I'm not going to go like overly like make myself sound too self-serious here. And I didn't invent the concept of memeing. It's already been around. And in some ways, that's the point, that it's a pretty common language format today. It's what's happening outside the workplace. Again, like I said, in the group chats that everyone is having. And so why not use that medium in a simpler way? You look at each of these things don't really teach someone something important, right? Not like they kind of introduce a concept, maybe. They definitely try to grab on something that is in either the current zeitgeist or grab on some nostalgia with my guy Cookie Monster there. Immediately you're trying to get common ground, like, hey, you guys have heard of this thing, right? This thing's popular, or you remember this thing? And then introduce the joke that's related to whatever I want to talk about. And now, hopefully, just with this, I've beat that 8-second clock. I have beat the goldfish clock at this point because there's going to be something that accompanies this, right? Maybe my email or my post. I actually want to talk about cookies for a second or online tracking technologies. Hey, let's talk about AI. Let's talk about GPT and what info we should be putting into it and what should we not be putting into it. Let's talk about our consumers. How much do they really care about our privacy practices? Would you be surprised to know that the average person does care about privacy in some ways? Those things don't win against that goldfish clock. Really, these things do because you've read it and you're like, that's funny. I remember Clippy. That's hilarious. He always used to bug me when I was trying to do essays for school at the middle of the night. And so now they're ready. This, you just got in, and now they'll read the content. Now they're like, hey, let's see what else this guy is saying. And I have planted a seed. Who knows when it will be helpful, that Alan likes to have fun. Alan is approachable. Alan is not taking his content or himself too seriously. All of those things have been planted in the minds of someone that has read this. And so, seeing this, people are far more comfortable to just reach out to me because I'm just a regular person. I like to have jokes. Even though this stuff is important, I can joke about it. I can have fun with it. And so I might be someone they might want to talk to compared to kind of the evil, boring person, that compliance officer that they have envisioned in their mind. We're dispelling some of that. Again, not to make it sound like it's magic, but these really do accomplish more than just give someone a chuckle. They really do help you leverage several things and improve that communication moving forward.
So we've got a question in the chat. How about the inverse, modifying one's confidently non-traditional speaking style to be more boardroom appropriate without losing that voice and persona? That's a really great question.
Yeah, absolutely. There's some things about humor don't have to go away. Let's say you're going to go in the boardroom. You're not necessarily gonna be like, all right, no jokes. We're going grim-faced, and we're just gonna be serious because these are serious men and women in the board. These people also like to have fun as well. And so again, you need to know your audience going in. Who's in the room? Are there things that they like? Who's somebody that everyone likes in this room that I can associate myself with and get some reflective shine from that person by kind of connecting myself to them? There are ways to be engaging and funny at really any level of seriousness. Any level. You will go to funerals sometimes and people will still inject some humor, which is such a sad kind of dour moment, it seems at times, but people are celebrating the life of the one who's just passed. So even there, people find the right way to get some humor, some funny stories about the person we're all there celebrating. And so you've got to know that audience, and you've got to know what topics, what kind of pop culture things will land with these people. It's usually not so much about, is it the boardroom or is it the conference room? Is it who is in the room? What are they into? What do they think might be funny? What can they commiserate with? What shared struggle would be great to bring up? And they'd be like, absolutely, Alan gets it. He understands what we're stressed about here in the boardroom. Let's keep listening to him because he's already built that bridge with us. And so it's a little bit of it depends is my response, but know those people and then, see how far you can go. Is Taylor Swift going to land in the boardroom? It will land at company X and not land at company Y, but you're in the room. So you've got to know kind of what will land, but don't feel like you've got to go full three-piece suit all the time, even there, because this stuff will still work even there.
Yeah, I think there's a ton of other, like, I think the main, the underlying thing there is simplification, right? And I know there's a meme circulating, I've seen a number of times, where you're like, I'm, responding to emails like, my CEO, and it's, like a 3-word answer, right? Like, and that's the reality working with executives is that, like dense information doesn't fly, right? Like you have very little time with these constituents. And so how can you make the point in the simplest way that you can? And I think it's just some of these other strategies, that we've been talking about around like storytelling, short video is another means. Actually, we've got an example here. And we're running a product master. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this today. We got a product master class going on later today if you're interested in learning more about Illuminator. But this is an example of a microsimulation we ran recently at HCCA, which is the Healthcare Compliance Conference. And it really demonstrates how short video storytelling can bring these threats to life in a way that's difficult to understand without it.
In an unsettling breach, a sophisticated hacker has recently infiltrated the Global Health Innovations Hospital network, gaining unauthorized access to an extensive array of security footage. This incident has raised alarms over the potential misuse of sensitive videos. The security systems, initially installed to enhance safety and accountability within the healthcare facility, have inadvertently become the vector for a significant privacy intrusion. The exact intentions of the attacker remain shrouded in mystery, amplifying the distress within the hospital community and beyond.
Yeah, so that's just an example
Hi,
of how you
Marco.
can leverage short video to bring some of these conversations to life. And at that event, actually James Green, who's on the call as well, we co-presented at that event, and we engaged the room for about 90 minutes in a conversation about this. And so leveraging short video for a deeper conversation or a story, for a deeper conversation, a really effective means of sparking those aha moments in the minds of your constituents. And what I love about, that particular example is that although it was a room of compliance professionals, they came from all sorts of roles, right? And so how can, everyone's relating to this story in a different way. And so how do you bring that conversation to life and really spark that social learning that happens when you're in these group settings? Are there specific ways? I know you do a lot of consulting, Alan. Are there specific ways that you use storytelling in the context of advising organizations?
Oh, absolutely. Storytelling is it's the classic thing people first are drawn to, or maybe if you're looking into like, how do I be a better speaker, or how do I be more engaging with my content? Storytelling often will come up, and there is a reason for that, because it is powerful, because it takes people like on a journey. It is a video-less video, right? You're just telling a story and people are envisioning it potentially, and you're going through this. Storytelling, especially stories where you are not the hero, are found to be incredibly helpful. Like, people don't often like stories where you're like, hey, I'm gonna tell you a story one time where there's this problem, and then I came in, I'm super smart and I'm really capable, and I just fixed it. Like, that's a terrible story. Who cares? People really like to hear a story about, hey, I'm an average person, and one time I got myself in a big pot of hot water with some decisions I made, and thankfully here's how I got out of it with some help from other people, and I really learned a valuable lesson kind of going through that experience. People are into that story because people are like, that's me, he's just like me for real. And so storytelling, videos, memes, hopefully you guys are seeing we're not really pushing just like one of these, like, here is the medium that you've been missing, just start doing this. You have got to be casting kind of a multimedia net with your content, because some is going to hit with some person, this kind will hit with someone else. This person is really engaged by the story that you're telling. You have got to get comfortable doing all of it, because like we said, your audience is diverse. They'll be into different things. And so it's, you got to be able to wield all of these tools effectively. But yeah, storytelling, classic. Get comfortable telling stories and telling funny stories about yourself making mistakes, because people like that and they see you as a real person.
Yes. Yeah, vulnerability is key in terms of making connections. So speaking of vulnerability, let's talk about the flops. Because I recently had a flop. I shared this video, which I'm gonna share just a bit of this. So this is a role play. For those of you that are part of Cicada Armageddon, you'll relate to this, but this is a role play of the 17-year cicada shared with me by my daughter. And I thought it was hysterical. One, I think it highlights how role play, so it, similar to what we just went through with the microsimulation, where you kind of put people in the moment and have them experience it as though they're living it. I think can also be a compelling way to really get people to experience and really de-escalate some of the emotion that you experience in the moment when the moment actually happens. And that's particularly true in these scenarios around compliance and response, where you don't want people to freeze, right? And I mean, that's just the reality of what we deal with. So I'll play a couple of minutes of this just so you can get the feel
Where
of
we are in the
this.
life cycle right now
'cause it is a
the
masterpiece.
cicadas are hiding right just below.
I mean,
the
what
soil
is not
surface
to love
and
about
emerge
this?
when the temperatures are right. It's roughly around 64 degrees soil temperature. And they'll come out, crawl up trees or other inanimate objects
So
like
I
garages and
posted,
stuff. And they will crawl
shared this on
out their
LinkedIn.
exoskeleton.
Turns out LinkedIn is not, they're not a fan of cicada content, I guess, Alan.
Hmm. Well, they can lag on certain things, but I love that you kind of said like let's talk about a flop, because like that's going to happen again. Let's not have any illusions that we're saying like just start doing this, your life will be changed forever. Like you've got to test stuff. You've got to do things, and there'll be times where you write something or you make a video or you have a story or a meme and you're like, this is a banger, I'm going to get people with this one, and it doesn't hit.
It doesn't
and
hit.
and it doesn't hit, and that's okay because not everything will. But you've got to be okay with testing stuff, because now you've learned something. You've either learned that medium isn't really best for my audience, that topic maybe isn't best, this day of the week maybe isn't the right time, people want to talk about this. You don't know exactly what you've learned yet, but you're starting to learn. As you keep testing, some of those things become clear. And if this is really important to you, to change the way that you are perceived, to engage people better, to be able to cut through and teach people important stuff more effectively, then you've got to be willing to test stuff and to go back to the drawing board and continue to refine it. And this is a great example, like you said. I mean, the commitment to the cicada in this performance is like Oscar winning. But if it didn't hit with people, you can't be determined. You gotta back to the drawing board and find what works.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I think there's also, which, we experience this a lot too, when content is edgier, sometimes, particularly in a professional setting, people are maybe more reluctant to engage with it publicly. And particularly as they're, I think, acclimating to some of these newer ideas or newer concepts, sometimes it takes, a few tries, sometimes it takes consistency in your message, before you really see that level of engagement. So really, to your point about experimentation, really understanding the feedback that you're getting, and not artificially, or I guess like, jumping to conclusions around like why it is that this isn't working, which is one of the things that I like so much about the story that you relayed earlier. Like you really unpacked what's not working about the situation, and then you were able to respond effectively to that in the moment. What's your favorite flop?
Oh man, there's so many. I have like a graveyard of, I guess they're not drafts because they tried, but they failed. So I don't know that one comes to mind right now. But usually like if they flop, I'm also stubborn. So they get like tweaked and they come back in some other form eventually. I'm like, y'all gonna laugh at this eventually. So they don't
You're gonna make
stay
this
dead
funny.
forever. They are reborn and they come back always.
Let's talk about that, because that's something we were talking about before the webinar. We both have notes. So inspiration can come from anywhere. And Al and I are both massive fans of taking, I should have taken a screenshot of some of my notes. You want to talk about, some of the journey that you've had around, like, how do you come up with some of the stuff that you put out?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I think I remember too at the beginning, we asked you, what are you hoping to get out of this? That was someone, maybe several people had, how do you get ideas? Like, where do you get ideas from? And that's hard at first, right? Because how do you know what to draw from? I'm trying to create commonality between audience and maybe audience I've never spoken for. How do I know what they're into? How do I find something that they're going to be engaged with? I think you take notes. I have just like an endless, on my notes app on my phone of just any idea that comes to me, it like goes in there. And that sometimes I don't write a great note and I go back to it and like, I have no idea what this was. So it's gone forever. So then I learn to take better notes. But you're always taking notes. Anything you see, take a screenshot of, like, that's a funny image. I don't even know how I would use that, but it's so funny. I'm just going to grab it and it's just going to live in my folder for a while. And I go back and look at them periodically. And then again, finding that bridge to people. How do I know what people are into? Well, like what's popular right now? What's going on in pop culture, on shows, in movies, in music, in the news? Like what are people generally talking about? You are greatly increasing your chances. They're going to know what you're talking about. You know, some things are so big that they're forever. Like you can put Cookie Monster in a meme always, and people will know who that is generally because he kind of surpassed that level of being forgotten, really. And then some things are just in that cultural zeitgeist right now. Taylor Swift, big example. Like everyone knows who she is, like her or don't. People know who she is. They know that a ton of people like her, and a ton of people are like right waiting online for days just to buy tickets to the show. So use that. So, you know, consume other media. What are people talking about? Listen to podcasts and read books that are not about the field that you are in, and see what other people are talking about. And you will start to see that content is everywhere because topics are everywhere, shared experiences are everywhere, and there's a lot of humor in a lot of these things. So you've got to start exposing yourself to new things to find some of those ideas, I think.
Yeah, I think you just nailed the trick there, like exposing yourself to all sorts of ideas, you know, wherever they may come from. I think also it can be valuable to crowdsource some of these ideas, like connect with your team, what resonates with them, right? It goes back to, you know, whether you build a formal persona or you don't, like what is it that they find entertaining, and or what is it that they find interesting, and build on that. You know, some of the principles that we use, and this is true not only of gamification, but also storytelling. But I think like the whole brain teaser approach, or like we talked about the light bulb moment or aha moment, you know, thinking about it more as a logic puzzle or something that's clever, as opposed to having to relay every single last detail. I think feeding people information in small bits, you know, can be very effective. And then building on that over time, of course. Having them come to you with things that have sparked them, I think is always, we're, you know, big fans of feedback loops at Illuminar. So how can you continue to build on some of that content that you're putting out? Realistic context, which I think is just such a underlying theme with all your content, Alan, in terms of like not, you know, you're not coming from on high, you know, telling people what they need to do, but you're making a statement in a very real life way. And I think acknowledging like there are shared truths that we all know, right? And they're funny because we all know them, but we may not necessarily say them. But sometimes saying them can actually be, you know, the kind of the spark up, yeah, you know, being provocative that really gets people to challenge. Well, it doesn't have to be that way, right? Like we had socialized a video about compliance training. It was taken from Toy Story, and like how, you know, a lot of people, you know, take their compliance training, you know, their annual compliance training, and, you know, find ways to kind of click through as quickly as they can. I mean, we all know that people do that. It's sort of taboo, right? But at the same time, like it's funny to think about that. And so pointing out the obvious in a way that is not, you know, it's not attacking anyone, but it's just reflective, I think, really builds that element of empathy for everyone, right? On both sides of the equation. And then I think too, like the elements of like we call it scaffolding in ed tech, like how you provide people the guardrails by which they can respond, but don't necessarily script what they need to do. And really have them make it their own, right? And that's one thing I love watching the engagement around your posts on social is like, it's not a one-way conversation, right? Like it's as much about like you putting yourself out there and your thoughts and your perspectives, but then all other people are engaging with you as well, which is just, it's such a great thing to see. Anything, how, like, I guess for people that are just starting out, or maybe they're not just starting out and they're having a hard time with that engagement element, like what what strategies, do you have?
Yeah, you mentioned something just a minute ago I think is important to talk about. You said, tell the truth about what's going on or what you want to talk about, but without attacking anyone. And that's an important piece. Like if you just have that persona that, hey, this is what's happening, and it may be true, yeah, some behavior is to blame for this, or some people are at fault for this. But we're not going to talk about that. We're going to say, this is what's happening, and this is the way forward. We're talking about the way forward, the positive. How do we fix it? We all know this is happening. Maybe even we all take part in it. Maybe even I take part in it. It's not the best. I want to stop doing it. How do I move forward? When you have it's a positive space for people to also to want to engage with, because they are not afraid to be associated with the content. That's another kind of important piece, I think, and that is your content such that anybody is okay with commenting on it or liking it, because they don't feel like they're really going out on a limb and they're going to, like, they're aligning with some radical ideal or some super negative approach. Some people go real negative stuff, especially in social media, and it does get a lot of engagement as well. So that's not my style. So I'm not a proponent of that. I think when you make your space with your content accessible to people, they're happy to jump in and join that conversation, because there is no fear, because there's no like, oh, I don't know if I'm smart enough, or like, this is kind of edgy, or like, do I really want to agree with what was just said? It seems kind of negative or puts one group in a bad light. Why would you want to limit that in that way? So I think, yeah, make your stuff the kind of thing people want to respond to, that they're happy to give their feedback on as well. And not just to say like, oh, this was funny, ha, or like, I like this, but also like, that's interesting you said it that way. I've always thought this, or I've got a great example that supports this. Just, it is open. The same way that when you're having that content that makes you as a person accessible, your content is accessible and people want to be part of it. It is, you build some community when you have that kind of content. And that's another great goal as we're thinking about what are your goals with what you're doing. Building that community should be one of those as well, if the situation and if you decide you want to.
Yeah, I think, we're running low on time here, but I just want to share a couple of case studies. These are using techniques like microsimulations, working with organizations to really bring some of these catastrophes to life so that people really know what to do in the event. But what's always struck me about storytelling, microsimulations, short video, etc., is really it really helps inform. It really helps build that muscle memory, but it also helps build the connectivity, the relationships. Lester Chang had a post recently. He's in cybersecurity. He's a cybersecurity leader, and he was talking about how exercises really allow you to connect with the secret superheroes, right, behind the scenes. And so I think we take that for granted. When we're in business as usual, that we just know who those people are. And we're going to know what to do with them. But I think, whether it's, memeing or whether it's storytelling, et cetera, like ultimately it's about connecting with people. I do want to ask you something. I know we talked about when we were preparing, because I think it's an important topic too. So part of the fear factor is around doing some of the edgy, like kind of non-traditional approach is, I'm going to create enemies, or people aren't going to like me, or people, to your point about the engagement piece, like sometimes you do post stuff and somebody disagrees with it, right? And what do you say in situation, for someone that might be facing some of that fear?
Sure. Well, you fall back on your goals, right? What were the goals that you were trying to accomplish with whatever you did? And that can be, and the ways you communicate they're so vastly different, right? One time we're just talking about making a post about something or sending an email blast at work. Another communication is what you see on the screen. It's designing like a ransomware attack scenario. So those are not apples to apples. your goals will be different, but what is the goal? You recognize what you've done in the past has not worked. If you have, if you've been doing some traditional stuff and not putting a lot of effort and not putting a lot of thought into what you're doing, you're saying that's not worked in the past. So my goal is to try something new, to hopefully teach somebody something, and to put myself out there as a resource for this kind of topic. Okay, so somebody engages with your content and they don't like it. Okay, that may be true. Did you try something new though? Did you accomplish that goal? Yes. Did you put yourself out there as someone that is speaking about this topic and is a source of knowledge on this topic? Yes, you accomplished that goal. And did you teach somebody something? Yeah, they might disagree with it, this one person or these people that might interact with your things, and yet you are still accomplishing those goals. The goal is not, I want to say something that everyone thinks is funny and likes, and they like me enough. That's not the goal. The real goal is those other things. So you are still accomplishing those, even if you have some feedback that's telling you you may not be hitting the mark, or it's just feedback. You listen to it and you're like, okay, this person didn't like it, but they represent 5% of the people that engage with my stuff and everyone else did. So I'm checking them out because overwhelmingly I'm hitting the mark here with what I'm doing. And so don't take your eyes off your goals. Your goal is to be an effective communicator, to get better at this, to create your persona. And you're doing that, even if sometimes you get feedback that's not what you would have wanted.
Yeah, and I think the reality is when you are trying to differentiate, when you are trying to stand out, and I think like, especially if you're doing something, if you're onto something, inevitably you will come across at least a few people that disagree with you. And I love how you frame that in terms of understanding your why, understanding, what your goals are, because, taking the emotion out again, like really de-escalating the emotion of maybe the conversation around a certain topic, and looking at it more objectively as to, how should I be communicating? How should I be engaging this particular person or the people around me, around the situation? So I want to invite anyone that has any questions to pop them into the chat. Just a few last things in terms of some tricks of the trade. These are some of my favorite apps from a marketing perspective that really allow us to create engaging experiences that go beyond the product. Mentimeter we've used today, Typeform and Google Forms are more around the like surveys. We use a variety of apps to create videos. Canva we use for creative. And then of course Illuminar is our core product offering that really allows us to bring these aha moments to life. If you're interested in taking home a microsimulation, or if you want to learn more, scan the QR code here or join us for one of our webinars later today, where we do a product showcase or a product masterclass on compliance, how to use microsimulations to better support compliance. And we also have a catalog of microsimulations that allow you to sort of browse different stories that are available to really bring to life your team. So if you're interested in any of that, definitely take advantage. But I do want to thank all of you. Alan, any last words of advice for this group?
Yeah, let me just echo something that we started with, which I think is maybe the most important piece, is just do what it takes to build your confidence, because that also is going to leave you unshaken when you get some of that feedback, because you already know, you've already laid that foundation. I know my industry, I know this topic, I know who I am as a communicator. And so then you can roll with whatever feedback comes because you have built that confidence in yourself, and everyone's capable to do that. And so get your confidence up, and then your comfort is going to follow really naturally.
Absolutely. Love it. Well, thank you all for joining us today. We appreciate you taking the time out, and we'll see you next time.